Potentially devastating winter. Russia's throttling of natural gas supplies is calling into question the continent's ability to heat homes and power the economy, especially as the temperature drops.
With winter approaching, countries like Germany need to find a way to keep the heat on. Canadian energy seems a logical solution to replacing natural gas.
Canada is as rich in resources in many ways as Russia, but that it is a dependable and reliable democracy.
Because the federal Liberals have made it economically impossible to build the pipelines, for example, build the infrastructure, and make this energy accessible. Canada is in a quandary like the rest of the world on the energy and environment front. And Quebec and Alberta have been at serious odds on that issue for the last decade, as well as Alberta and the federal government. And the chickens in many ways are coming home to roost. I mean, the German chancellor came to Canada a few weeks ago, cap in hand, and asked his old ally, the Canadians, for help with liquid natural gas provision, for example, to help reduce this catastrophic German dependence on Russian fossil fuel exports. And Trudeau basically sent him away empty-handed, stating in a manner so utterly preposterous that it's a form of idiot miracle that no business case could be made for Canada to export liquid natural gas to Europe, to Germany in particular. And that's so utterly preposterous because we have so much natural gas and we have the facilities to liquefy it. And the only reason a business case can't be made is because the federal Liberals have made it economically impossible for any actors to build the pipelines, for example, build the infrastructure and make this energy accessible. And so if you were leader of the provincial government in Quebec, what do you think you could do? What would you be inclined to do, let's say with Alberta and the rest of Canada to rectify that?
Well, the first thing regarding oil and gas, not a few days ago, I was in the Saguenay region, northeast of Quebec, to say that I'm the only political leader right now who's in favor of the LNG Quebec project, which is natural liquefied gas project, a $14 billion investment. Our Quebec government initially was in favor of it. Mr. Legault, the current premier, even met with the Alberta premier, and he was all in favor of it. And then a few environmentalists stood up in Montreal, and Mr. Legault flip-flopped and decided that now, he did even worse than that. He did adopt a bill 3 months ago to say that in Quebec it's forbidden to explore and exploit any kind of oil and gas. He went to the other extreme. He denied the rights of the companies who already had rights given by the Quebec government, and now we're sued. I mean, the Quebec government is sued for billions. I think it's $18 billion because we were denying rights of companies that were given by the government. So it's a real mess.
So he scuttled a $14 billion project,
yeah,
and then accrued $18 billion in potential legal liability,
yeah,
to not produce fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to push you.
Look good in front of the environmentalists. Let's put it that way.
I'm going to push you on that because it needs to be done. So I'm going to be environmentalist here, and I'm going to say,
go ahead.
we need to transfer away from these despicable fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. There's going to be a substantial amount of economic disruption as a consequence. People are going to have to bear more costs on the energy front, but that's okay because they should be burning less fossil fuel anyways because of the liability accrued by the planet. These are necessary disruptions as we move toward a sustainable economy. And if a few eggs have to be broken to make an omelet, then c'est la vie. And so what do you think about that line of argumentation? How do you respond to it? How do you counter it? Do you accept it?
There's a few things we need to say. First off, our dependence on gas and oil is not going to stop tomorrow. The transition is going to take a few decades. Actually, we're even estimating right now that for gas, let's say, for the next 50 years, there's going to be a growth in terms of demand. So, yes, we're going to get out of it, but it's not going to happen overnight. It could happen in 5, 6, 7, 8 decades.
Okay, so I say, well, that's too long. We're going to be roasting in our oven-like homes in 10 years. We have to act more precipitously, and if it requires force and fear, so be it. So why is that a problematic argument if it is?
It is it doesn't make sense in my book, because what are you going to do in the meantime? Like tomorrow morning, we're 100% dependent right now in Quebec of oil and gas coming from outside, okay? And so if you know, and we saw what's happening in Western Europe right now, because they were dependent of gas coming from Russia, and we see how it's a huge problem not to be autonomous in terms of energy. So are you proposing, and the parties are always good. Currently in Quebec, all the parties, all the other political parties, they have goals, you know, and they're promising that they're gonna cut our gas emission by 37.5%, 45%, 55%. It's like an auction to know which one is gonna have the highest percentage of cutting gas emission. But when you look at it, no one's ready to tell you how they're gonna do that. How many factories are they gonna shut down? How many million people are gonna say they can't drive their cars anymore? How many, ski-doos and yachts and how are they gonna do that? They never ever say it, and every single time those politicians promise that, they're always lying. They never ever achieve their goal. It's always easy to look good, and that's the problem with the left often. They want to show off.
Well, you see this is happening in the US too, is that as the nanny state and the radical leftist incursion into federal and state institutions proceeds apace, where that's hit the most resistance is on the issue of parent rights. And people are pulling their children in the US out of the public education system at a remarkable rate, because people will accept without protest a fair bit of interference with their lives on behalf of a hypothetically benevolent but ultimately totalitarian state. But they will not accept the propaganda campaigns directed at their children. And so the reason I'm saying that isn't for a political reason exactly, it's to point out the logic of the principle of subsidiarity, because you should have parents making decisions for their children precisely because there's no one who is going to care for children more than parents.
Exactly.
And if the state says it will, it's delusional. Because, well, how in the world can an abstract organization, distant from the children it's serving, unrelated to them, and not knowing them personally, possibly care for them in all their individual particularity, as well as biologically related kin who are immediately living with them? I mean, it's a preposterous assumption on all fronts, and people will definitely rebel against that when their children are threatened.